Hi, everybody, and welcome back to another edition of the Beyond the Cage podcast. I'm your host, Jim Gramm. Alongside me is my co-host, Billy Brant. On this week's show, it is a special edition. We are doing our fourth annual 30 Under 30 and MMA list once again here for 2015. Billy and I have looked over the top MMA fighters in the world that are under the age of 30 and compiled a list of the top 30. And this is a list that we've been doing since we started the show back in 2012. As I said, this will be the fourth year of the list. And once again, more for the second year in a row. The reason we didn't include women or do a women's only list, if you are somehow wondering, most of the fighters that are competing in women's MMA, especially the top females, are almost all under the age of 30. If you name a top female fighter right now, they're under 30 years old. I think the only one who isn't is Miesha Tate and Cyborg, that and Marlis Kunin. That's it. So there's not that range of fighters to really do it on, and that's the main reason why we're not doing it. So maybe in the next year we'll reevaluate again, but it's not something I did just because they're women. As we know, we cover women's MMA a lot. We do Invicta interviews. I mean, so nothing like that. Just I didn't feel it was the right time to do that list yet.
We could do a top 3 over 30.
Yeah, top 3 over 30. If we did a list, it'd have to be a much smaller list. It'd have to be something like a top 20 under 25 or something really kind of to make it something, but maybe something previous. But I just wanted to kind of keep the theme 30 under 30. It sounds better. It's nice. And typically also 30 is kind of the tipping point when people start, you already are what you are in your career by the time you hit 30 years old. You're not going to the only guy he just got off the list is Rafael dos Anjos. He's one of the few guys that has really drastically changed his career. And Robbie Lawler, probably another one. But most guys, you're either on a fast path or by the time you're 30, you're already a gatekeeper. It's just kind of how it goes.
There's a few that are going to be the exception that find this way and they turn it around and find this stride. But for the most part, at this sport, I mean, there are people too that start the sport later, so you never know, like Daniel Cormier, stuff like that. But,
Shane Carwin.
Yeah, but for a lot of these people that are starting so younger, especially now that mixed martial arts is so big, people are starting younger and younger. You're at about that time.
All right, before we get to who made the cut this year, let's look at who got dropped off from last year's list. So looking over at that, who got removed this year? Not as many names as our 2014 list that got dropped off, but still a lot of notable guys. We'll start at the top. Dominic Cruz, he got removed due to age, and he's a very interesting case because he's a guy that actually at one point was removed the list because of injury, had the fight against Mizugaki, so he came back onto the list. Now he's off the list now that he is actually 30 years old, so he departs the list at number 7. Chad Mendez was at number 9. Cub Swanson at number 11. The aforementioned Rafael dos Anjos was 14 last year. Luke Rockhold was 21, Nate Diaz at 25, Jake Ellenberger at 26, and Gegard Mousasi at number 30. All are leaving the list this year. Also leaving the list, but not due to age, due to injury. This guy has not fought in over 2 years. That would be the young gun Michael McDonald, who actually fought for the bantamweight title a few years ago. He's still only like 24 years old, so there's still a chance for him to get back on this list and still be one of the top bantamweight fighters in the UFC, but has a host of injury problems, and I haven't heard really any updates on the kid in a very long time. So it's starting to the point where his career may be done, which is sad because he had such a, the guy was able to get a title shot under the age of 24. He was like 16-2, top 10 fighter, and I'd like to see him come back in the sport, but it's once you get past 2-3 years, it's looking less and less likely.
Yeah, it really is a shame for him because, I mean, he had so much potential. Like you said, we see him get that title shot so early. But to look at the bright side, he is so young, so he still can find it. When you look at guys I feel more bad for, like Dominic Cruz, who they found their stride, and they're in the prime of their career, and then they get taken out for 3 years. It's like right in that prime of his career. He's turning 30 now, so he's going to go towards the back end. And for Mike McDonald is good. He's so young. I wouldn't be surprised if he gets back in there and you see him right back here next year.
And he was number 27 on the list last year. And also for the first time doing the list, this is again our 4th year doing it, we had to remove 2 people because we had to make room for other people. First time we've had to do that. Pat Kern, who was number 28 on the list last year, he didn't quite make the cut. And either did Michael Chandler, who was number 22 on the list last year. And one of the reasons those two gentlemen did not make it is, one, they're no longer the champions in their respective division for Bellator, and two, they've had a couple losses that they're a little bit trending down, especially Pat Curran. I mean, he had that really major mess up kind of to Daniel Strauss in the past year, lost. Then he lost the fight to Pitbull. Then he had that loss, I believe, to Daniel Weichel, where he didn't look very good. So Pat Curran, to me, is trending down a little bit. Chandler, the same thing. I mean, he got dominated twice by Will Brooks. The first one was pretty close. You could make a case he won that one. But the second one, Will Brooks was just leaps and bounds ahead of him in that fight. I'm not really sure what happened there. So Michael Chandler, I still like him. I still think he has a lot of potential left in the sport. A guy Bellator is still lucky to have, but obviously trending down a little bit this year.
Yeah, and I just want to say a good point, too, before this is the fact that we had to make room for people is such a good thing. It just shows how much the sport's growing and, like, the youth in the sport. And I'm really excited for future years to see all these, like, I mean, there's a ton of young guys that you can't put on this list because they're not that established, like Yair Rodriguez, Sage Northcutt. But in the future, I mean, there's so much good names to look forward to. But, yeah, as far as Pat Curran and Chandler, it's tough for them not to, like, down Bellator, but when you're not the premier – or you're not the title holder in your organization, and then Bellator's it's not the premier organization anyway, and you're taking a couple losses outside of it. It's really tough. You got to be at the top to be on this list. So
now, if you're looking, obviously we're going to go through the list here on this video, but if you want to see a actual list, a computer list of this, there's a link down in the comments. You'll see the link. It'll take you right to this year's list, and then it also includes our previous 3 years list. So you'll see the complete history of Beyond the Cage 30 under 30. So that's down in the comments if you want to check that out, or obviously kind of look at it as we go along here in the list. So we're going to go from bottom to top, starting with number 30. So kind of the format, we're going to do about 5 a time, kind of talk about a few of the fighters, and then go up to the next 5 in the list until we reach our number 1 fighter on the list. So let's start first here with the first group of 5, starting first with number 30, Tariq Saffiedine, UFC welterweight. He is tied for one of the biggest drops on this year's list. He was number 20 last year, now sitting at number 30 as he drops 10 spots, and he is tied with the guy just ahead of him, Bobby Green, UFC lightweight. He was number 19 last year. He drops 10 spots to number 29. Making a first appearance here on the list, Stefan Struve. And an interesting note about him, he's the only heavyweight on this list, and he's been the only heavyweight in the last 2 years to be featured on our 30 under 30 list.
Can we do a heavyweight top 10 over 40, and it's just the top 10?
Yeah,
it's just the actual top 10.
Pretty much. Checking in also for his first year on the list, Justin Gaethje, World Series of Fighting lightweight champion. And at number 26 to round out the bottom 5, Dennis Bermudez, and he took a pretty big drop too. He dropped 9 spots. He was number 17 last year, checks in at number 26. And kind of looking over the bottom 5, Tariq Saffiedine was a guy that, coming from Strikeforce, had a lot of momentum. He had that big win against Nate Marquardt, comes into the UFC, has a very nice 5-round main event win over Hung-Gyu Lim. Things are looking pretty good for him. Then he runs into Rory McDonald, gets knocked out in the 3rd round. While that was a close fight in the first 2 rounds, still got finished. And since then, just hasn't been heard of. He's kind of dropped off the face of the map a little bit. The recent news with him, he's actually now going to train with Rory McDonald at TriStar in Montreal. I think he's had some injury problems. Not to say his bad camp was bad. He trained with Dan Henderson out there in Temecula at Team Quest. So just a change of venues for him might bring some good fortune. But it hasn't been the greatest year for Tariq Saffiedine, so thus the big drop for him.
Yeah, for a lot, you'll notice in a lot of this bottom 5, there's sort of a trend of, like, these guys came in, they had a lot of hype and potential around them, and they just took a few setbacks that haven't put them quite where they should be. Like Saffiedine, even Green was on a big tear for a minute, and he took
same thing with Bobby Green. Yeah, he had the loss to Barboza. He had some injury problems as well.
Bermudez, he won a ton in a row, and then he finally got. So a lot of these guys they're still young, obviously under 30, and they have a lot of potential, but they just hit that rough patch from all the hype they came in with.
Yeah, and that's pretty much the case, like you said, with Green, Saffiedine, and Bermudez. Still top guys, still exciting guys, can still make a push, but had to drop him in comparison to some of the other guys. Struve and Gaethje, like I said, Struve, the first heavyweight in 2 years to be on this list. And I really wanted to add a heavyweight because I kind of almost feel bad because you look at this whole list and you see all this talent, like, well, where's the heavyweights? And they're just not young heavyweights guys. And that's why when people talk about the heavyweight division, that's why it's hard to get excited about it because there's nobody coming up. Even you would say, oh, what about Stipe? Well, Stipe's 33 now or going on 33. That's still young compared to some of the other guys, but it's still, if you look at other divisions and you say your next best young contender is 33, there's a reason why the heavyweight division is dying, and there's just no young guys really coming up.
Yeah, it's tough for heavyweight right now. I mean, you basically got your set people, and I feel like there's like an elite 3 at heavyweight, maybe 4, maybe the top 5 even, I'd say. And then after that, it just feels like there's just a big drop. Like I feel like under there, it's like not even close in competition almost. So it's tough. And there's a few young guys with potential, and Struve has definitely showed signs of it. And if he can pull it together, he still has a lot in the sport. He's went through a lot of setbacks, a lot of big wins, but he's so young for heavyweight.
And Justin Gaethje, I really want on this list. This is a kid that when he's fighting, I have to watch. His nickname, The Highlight, is apt. This kid is just nonstop action. People just talk about his striking, but he was an All-American wrestler in college. The guy has a legit wrestling game, and he maybe wouldn't. His conditioning maybe wasn't as great, and that Palomino maybe burned himself out a little quick. But this kid just keeps on coming, man, and he's powerful. He almost, who he really reminds me of? He reminds me of a little bigger T.J. Dillashaw. The way his striking's constant, it's in your face. It's not always hard, but he can throw power. He mixes things nicely, and he has that wrestling game to go back on. And he's a guy that I know World Series of Fight, again, much like we talked about some of the other guys, and lucky to have. And just when he gets to the UFC, he's going to be ready. I honestly think right now he can compete with the top 10 of the UFC. And I don't think that's a stretch to say that at all.
At first, when he signed that contract with World Series of Fighting, I was kind of in the boat of like, why, man? You could have gone to the UFC, but maybe I kind of like it. Maybe he wants to be groomed more. Some of these guys, they try and make the jump too quick, and I do feel like you're saying, I feel like he will be ready, and he will be one of these guys. And for him, he's kind of low on this list, but I wouldn't be surprised next year if you see him shooting way up. He's going to keep moving.
All right, the next 5, we're going to do 25 to 21. At number 25, Eduardo Dantes, Bellator bantamweight. At number 24, Jeremy Stevens, UFC featherweight. At number 23, Miles Jury, now officially fighting in the featherweight division. Aljamain Sterling at number 22, UFC bantamweight. And Henry Cejudo, UFC flyweight, checking in at number 21. Looking at Stevens, Dantes first. He was number 29 last year, so he gets a nice boost up there, 4 spots. Stevens was 24 last year, so he stays exactly the same. Jury drops a little bit. Of course, he's only fought once this year. That was the loss to Donald Cerrone. He had the injury. He was supposed to fight in July against Anthony Pettis, but with that injury, decided to drop down another 10 pounds. He's now fighting in Orlando against Charles Oliveira for his first featherweight fight, so no one easy for Miles Jury.
Give him a warm-up.
Yeah, the guy just right down the road here from us over in Hazel Park. Just over on the other side of Detroit from us here. So we'll definitely pull in for Miles in that fight. Our boy, Aljamain Sterling, the Funk Master. Man, this guy is great. I hope to get him back for an interview. I don't know if you follow the Funk Master on Snapchat. If you don't, do it. You will not be disappointed. Dude's always having great snaps. So if you're on Snapchat, I believe it's just like his Twitter handle, funkmaster_UFC. Great guy to follow. And then, of course, the Olympic wrestling gold medalist, Henry Cejudo. This kid could be the one to dethrone Mighty Mouse. That's kind of what it appears to be. So we check him in at number 21.
It's weird how you can see each section has its trend. Like the first section is like these guys that came in with this potential and sort of had rough patches, but they still have a lot. This seems like the one where it's like, these are the young guys you really need to look out for. I mean, guys like Aljamain Sterling, I don't know if anyone wants to fight him right now because he's not the biggest name yet, but people know how dangerous he is. And then you got Miles Jury. He kind of took a setback at the end, but I really like the featherweight move. I think would be good, but he's definitely got a tough matchup on his hands, so I look forward to that. And yeah, Henry, I mean, these guys are so good. I don't want to say I think he could be the guy to beat Mighty Mouse because that's huge for anyone, but he might be the one that could do it. I mean, yeah, this section of the list is just really strong as far as the potential category, I think. More higher, they're a little more established, but these are all guys that in the next couple of years all have potential to be champions.
And unfortunately for Dantes, had his fight happened here with Galvo coming up in a couple weeks, he could have shot up higher because then he would have once again be the bantamweight champion. But this is a guy who's only 26 years old in Dantes, and I still think has a lot of room to grow. And a guy that I think because of the way Bellator used to do their title shots, he was kind of left inactive a lot because he had to wait for the tournament winner. And I actually think we're going to see Dantes fight a lot more now that they're going into a more traditional format. Because remember, he had to take that fight down in Brazil against Tyson Nam, and that's when he lost. So now he won't be doing anything like that anymore. So he's definitely a guy I still think with his frame could even one day move up to 45 because he's such a, I mean, there aren't too many guys 5'9" fighting at 135 pounds. That's a really tall guy at 26. He could, that's even tall for featherweight if he ends up eventually moving to featherweight. But he is a guy I think has a lot of skill. Jeremy Stevens didn't fall quite as some of the other guys because he was able to get that bounce back win over Dennis Bermudez and now has a huge fight coming up against Max Holloway. If he beats Max Holloway, he's right back into the title discussion. And this was a guy that shot onto the featherweight scene after dropping down. Then he had those two tough losses back-to-back against Oliveira and Cub Swanson. Is able to come back, like I said, get that huge knockout victory over Bermudez. And if he beats Max Holloway, he's right back into the thick of things at 145.
Yeah, I mean, he's took a few losses, but he's fighting no one but the best. I mean, these guys, and honestly, yeah, with Holloway, I think he's one win away from a title shot in my eyes. I mean, I know the division is pretty crazy right now, so it might be a while, but I mean, if you can get past a guy like Holloway or just having that fight, I wouldn't be surprised if either of them is one fight away from a title shot or a title shot, depending how it all lays out.
What I'm thinking may happen, and this is a lot of what ifs, but I just want to go into real quick because I was thinking about this the other day. If Frankie Edgar wins over Chad Mendes, most people would agree, no doubt, Frankie Edgar gets the next shot at the featherweight title. So that's kind of the scenario I'm going to. No offense to Chad Mendes, but just roll with me here for a second. So we have, as I mentioned, Jury against Oliveira, then we have Stevens against Max Holloway. To me, those two winners then would fight each other to become the number one contender after Frankie Edgar. That's kind of how I see it playing out in my head.
I'll be honest with you how I see it playing out in my head.
Okay.
Frankie Edgar always gets he gets the bad end of the deal here. So McGregor comes out, beats Aldo, right? They're doing an instant rematch. The winner of Holloway has to fight Frankie. Yeah, exactly.
It could.
I feel bad for Edgar because he shouldn't have to.
Yeah.
But he's going to have to. If that's a big if too, because Aldo could come out there and destroy Conor. But honestly, I think if Conor makes that fight close at all, like if there's any people out there that are like, no, Conor won that fight and Aldo gets a decision, I think they're going to run a rematch anyway.
They could. The only thing is, even though the fight technically didn't happen at was that 189? You then are promoting Conor Aldo for like 3 consecutive fights.
Yeah.
And then do we run the risk of it being, all right, we're already hype on, especially that's the only thing I could see being a detriment to that being like an immediate rematch.
But I'm saying like, all right, if Conor wins, it's a rematch no matter what. They're going to give Aldo a rematch. Unless he knocks him out in like a minute, which would be, even then they probably will. They gave Kane one to Santos. And then, what was I about to say? And then if it's anything like, imagine if the fight plays out like Aldo Mendez too. They're going to do it immediately. Like if it's not a boring fight at all and it's not close at all, I feel like they're going to try and do it as much as they can because the fight's going to be that big. Even though, personally, I don't want to see as many automatic rematches. I think they're doing too many of them now, and I would like to see Frankie get the winner no matter what.
All right, let's get to the next section on our list. Will be 20 through 16, and we're going to see a lot more people making their first appearance here on the list, starting at number 20. Speaking of a kid nobody wants to fight, this kid Thomas Almeida in the bantamweight division, undefeated in his career, I believe 17-0, coming off that huge knockout over Brad Pickett.
Just finishing everyone.
Yeah, he's a monster. He's definitely a guy that I think can give people trouble in this division with his power. Supposedly he has good jiu-jitsu skills. We haven't seen him. He hasn't had to show them. And he also, I think one thing he did show, at least in the Tim Gorman fight, he has pretty good takedown defense, which and Tim Gordon's a very solid wrestler. So I think that is something that he has, and a lot of people, just put him on his back. Well, some people have tried. They haven't been able to. So I think that's one of the reasons why he's been successful, is that he's keeping it standing. And so far, No one's been able to touch him there. This guy was tough to put high, low. I wasn't sure where to put him. Settled on number 19, that being Kelvin Gastelum. Technically a welterweight if he can make weight here coming up against Matt Brown. So hopefully, but he's a young guy, I believe 23 years old, a lot of potential in the division. So we put him there at 19. Number 18, Charles Oliveira, making his first appearance on the list. Of course, this guy can submit just about anybody in the division. I feel his jiu-jitsu is second to none. I mean, he doesn't have the world championships that Damian Maia and Jacare have, but
You better be
I
just
wouldn't
as
want to mess
worried.
with
Yeah.
him. Yeah, I wouldn't want to mess with him there. Number 17, making his first year on the list, a guy that was considered in years past, but kind of had a couple of setback losses, but now I think is on the right track, training with Frankie Edgar in New Jersey, that being Edson Barbosa at number 17. And rounding out this section, Kaiji Horiguchi at number 16. The reason we put him higher than Henry, if you look at the other flyweight here that isn't Mighty Mouse, he's already had that title shot. He's had the more explosive fights, the better finishes. He's a little more flashy, and thus that's why I went with Horiguchi over Cueto here, looking at this list, why I put him a couple spots higher.
Yeah, these five are insane. I mean, you start with Almeida, who he's another one just like the Funk Master, where he's not the biggest name to the casual fans. So a lot of guys don't want to deal with him because they know what the threat he brings. I mean, I don't know if there's anyone you can put in front of him that I wouldn't be like, he's probably going to finish him. And then Gastelum, he's had some troubles with the weight cut and then moving divisions and stuff, but I don't think anyone expected it. I mean, even going into the Ultimate Fighter finale, I don't think there's one person in the world that picked him. And then not only does he get through Hall, but he makes a surge in division to fight top 5 opponents. I mean, he fights Woodley to a close one who's probably fighting for a title now. So there's a lot. And then Oliveira, he had a tough setback in that last fight. It finished weird. We really don't know where that fight could have went. But, I mean, there's no questioning this guy's skills and how good he is. I mean, he can submit anyone. Oh, man, I just want to talk about everyone in detail because like Edson Barbosa, too, this guy's – you don't want to strike with him, and he's another one who he had some tough fights in the beginning, but they're just finally putting it all together, and I don't think there's anyone's going to stand with him. His last fight, Felder amazed me that he did, but you don't want to stand with that dude.
Our next section here, the list, we get to see a lot of the people that made the big jumps up on this year's list. We start to kind of get into that. So starting at number 15, first year on the list, Lorenz Larkin finally has found a division. Can you believe it? At one point in time, this dude was fighting light heavyweights in Strikeforce at one point in time. Now fighting welterweights in the UFC, 3-0 since making the drop to 170. A lot of people are talking about him. Of course, he already owns a victory over UFC welterweight champion Robbie Lawler. That was a win back in the Strikeforce. I believe that was at 185. So this is a guy that has great power, just crisp striking. And so far, his conditioning is held up at 170. I think he's really just on the cusp. So he needs that 1 or 2 big fights in the division. He can make a huge splash. And like I said, if Robbie Lawler stays the champion, you know UFC likes building up rematches and revenge things. So he has a good path to the title with already owning that victory over Robbie.
This guy, I mean, there's Flash and Reverse Flash, and then there's Anthony Rumble Johnson and Reverse Anthony Rumble Johnson. He went from fighting welterweight to just huge fighting light heavyweights, and Larkin did the exact opposite, and they both have had the same effect almost. When Rumble goes up and he's destroying people, Larkin's been destroying people. So there you go. If you didn't know, those two are the same but opposite. So I look forward to a lot of his future fights.
At number 14, the aforementioned, we talked about this kid, 23 years old, Max Holloway, has already fought over 10 times in the UFC. I believe 5 wins in a row now for the kid out of Hawaii, on the cusp of a UFC title shot. Just main event his first card up in Canada. And now, like I said, he has that big fight coming up in December in Vegas as he's taking on Jeremy Stevens, a very dangerous opponent, and it should be very exciting.
Yeah, and we talk about under 30 for this list, and like a lot of these guys are like 28, 29. They're sort of on the edge, and Holloway has probably had more UFC fights than a lot of them, and he's only like 23 or 24. He's like super young, and he's an absolute killer and a finisher in every right of the game. So, I mean, Max Holloway, I see him 100%. I'd put my money that he has a title one day.
Number 13, Patricio Pitbull, the Bellator featherweight champion. What a year this guy has had. He jumps up 10 spots, our biggest jump on the list this year. He was number 23 last year, gets the huge jump. And what a year this guy had. He beats Pat Curran to become the champion, get back in that rematch. Then he has a very close fight. I think he was losing against Daniel Strauss, is able to come back, submit Daniel Strauss, get that win. And then he fought Daniel Weichel, kind of on the ropes a little bit. What does he do? Throws a big haymaker, knocks out Daniel Weichel, and just, you can't count this guy out of the fight. He can finish you anywhere. People just talk about his striking, but he's a great grappler. He's hard to take down. And if you do want to grapple with him, ask Daniel Strauss. He can submit you rather quickly if you want to try that game. And that's what he did. And of course, he has a title fight coming up as well against Daniel Strauss again, which should be another amazing fight. That's going to be the co-main event for the Vengeance card for Bellator coming up. I can't wait for that. Pitbull he went from a guy that just seemed like a one-dimensional striker into an amazing, well-rounded fighter that is one of the best 145ers in the world.
Yeah, if we made a list just off exciting fighters, like he's number one on this list. There's not a Pitbull fight you do not want to watch. He always makes it exciting. He's like Frankie Edgar too, where if you rock him, it's probably going to get worse for you. Like you think he's in trouble, and then he comes back and finds a way to get the job done. So he's just, there's not enough good things you can say about him. And for Bellator, it's like the best thing for him to have as far as exciting fights, because I think that's a draw that no matter what, I'm like, oh, Pitbull's on that card, turn my TV on.
Number 12, the second World Series of Fighting guy, Marlon Moraes. He was number 16 last year. He jumps up 4 spots to number 12. This is a guy that has just dominated everybody that World Series of Fighting has put in front of them. And I think even more so than Justin Gaethje, he's run out of guys to fight. I don't know where World Series of Fighting has found half the guys he's even fought. I mean, he's clearly like, he needs to go to UFC or Bellator, because Bellator has some good 35ers as well, but he needs to go somewhere to get challenged. And that's why he's kind of almost maxed out at 12. I can't put him higher because as dominant as he's been, he's only fought 1 or 2 guys I would consider near the top 15 of the bantamweight division. That was like Tyson Nam and Miguel Torres was still towards the end of his career, but at least that's someone's heard of, not these Josh Hempelman and guys they pull out of nowhere that he's just dominating.
I was just about to say, as dominant as he's been, he could do this for another 4 years, and he's peaked right there at this point unless he moves up to the higher talent. Don't get me wrong, not taking anything away from him. To be dominant versus that many people is hard no matter what, but like, if you want to break that, he has to. Yeah, even Bellator would help him. There's a lot of good names over there. The UFC for sure, obviously. So for him, it's more just where do you go from here, because you've maxed out there.
Number 11, just outside the top 10, another boost. Will Brooks, the Bellator lightweight champion, he gets bumped up 4 spots, number 15 last year. And again, another guy that he's beaten pretty much everybody so far in Bellator, but he hasn't done it really flashy. But that's just Will Brooks. He's kind of like the Mighty Mouse of Bellator. He's a guy that just outworks all of his opponents. He has better conditioning. He has better technique. And he's going to implement his game plan. And so far, no one's, other than Saeed Awad, who caught him really quickly in that first 30 seconds, knocked him out. That's about it. He's gotten back at everybody he's faced. I mean, he has a tough challenge coming up. I mentioned the Vengeance card. He's going to take on Masin Hell, the leg lock expert. That guy, he's a wizard on the ground there. So that's going to be a tough test for him, because I don't think he's faced anybody with that level of jiu-jitsu. So it should be interesting in that aspect. But if it stays standing, obviously that's a fight that Will Brooks can easily win.
Yeah, I mean, this is another guy too that just came out of nowhere. I don't think anyone expected him the first time around, and then look how he's been. And like you said, there's nothing too flashy, but he gets the job done, and he's going to be there. But yeah, I'm excited for this guy. See, these last 3 names we've seen are all guys I just want to see fight in the UFC.
Mm-hmm.
Though. I really do, because I think they're the top. They're in the top 10 for sure, and all of them are in the top 10 of the UFC in their weight. So, it's hard, because all these guys, I feel like they're sort of capped out right there because of it, even though they're that good.
All right, let's get to the top 10 here. 10 through 6, making a little bit of a downward spiral right now. He may even switch weight class, and I think they said he is going to switch weight classes, that being Henan Brow, the former UFC bantamweight champion, went on a streak of not losing for 6 years, and then ran into a guy by the name of TJ Dillashaw, lost to him twice, lost his title, and now may kind of forced out of the division, so to speak. So he's number 10, still a very talented guy, still very young in the sport, despite all he's already accomplished. He's a guy that you look at his run, and I really count his run when he became intern champion, because he ended up defending it, I think, 3 or 4 times. I mean, that's awfully impressive.
100%.
Especially looking at the guys he beat. I mean, he beat Uriah Faber twice. He beat Michael McDonald. I'm missing. So he beat somebody else too, I think, in the title defense as well. But yeah, and then the first fight against Dillashaw, and it was just the strategy with him not having as good a conditioning too. He just couldn't counteract that. And like I said, still a guy with a lot of talent, but it looks as though maybe 45 might be better for him.
It's like with Renan Barão, and we'll get into it with Aldo later, it absolutely blows me away that they're still on this list. You think of how dominant and how long they've been this dominant. I mean, Renan Barão went like how many fights straight without losing, defends the belt all that time, and people like to kind of trash him because how dominant Dillashaw has been, and he took it over. But I don't care when you're that dominant, you beat guys like Uriah Faber. I mean, twice, right? He did it twice, and then how dominant he was. I mean, Renan Barão is one of the best by far, and he deserves every bit of the respect he gets when people talk about Renan Barão. He is just a monster.
Now we have this guy here at number 9. He made a slight jump up 3 spots.
This one.
And he's a guy that if he loses coming up here in December, he can drop very far on this list just because he's been inactive, and that's Khabib Nurmagomedov. And his fight against Tony Ferguson is huge. I think you can make a case the winner of that fight gets a shot at the UFC title. Both guys have been on such a tremendous roll, and Khabib has been long talked about getting a title shot, but he keeps on getting hurt, and it keeps delaying his chances at a title, especially when he has a win over the current champion. Like I said with Lorenz Larkin, when you got to win over the guy that is the champion, it really helps your path, much like Rafael Asunciao also in the bantamweight division. So it really helps your chances of kind of expeding the process, and he could have already done that, but he just keeps on getting hurt. So hopefully, I'm knocking on this little wood table I have here, that he can last the 2 months until he fights Tony Ferguson. But yeah, if he loses that fight, he's going to go. I wouldn't be surprised last year if he shows up somewhere in the 20s, because he'll drop quick.
He might be out of this list. Honestly, Khabib, I mean, don't get me wrong. He's had some dominant performances. If you look how good RDA has been and look at how dominant he was, I mean, I hate MMA math, but there's no doubt it's impressive. But he's just been so injured. We barely got to see anything else from him. That being said, if you go out there and beat a guy like Tony Ferg, yeah, you're getting a title shot. Either of those guys, 100%, especially because he has a win over RDA and all the hype around him. I think he'll get a title shot. And then Tony Ferguson has just been on an insane tear. I mean, I don't want to get too much into him because he's not the one we're talking about. But that fight for sure is the next title shot. And for Khabib, I don't want to say it's bloated, the hype around him, but it could all go away really quick, like you said.
Now, the next 3 guys have all had their last fights be losses for a UFC title. So to me, they're kind of like the best guys, like not to be the UFC champion. So that's why they're sitting where they're at. So that's Anthony Pettis at 8, Rory McDonald at 7, and Alexander Gustafsson at 6. That's kind of how I put it there. So obviously Pettis has only just fought the once this year, McDonald, and then Gustafsson the most recent. So maybe that's why I put him a little bit higher than the other 2, but just the way he fights, he's been so close to being a champion. You know, it's you feel bad for the guy. So he gets a slight boost. He moves up 2, was 8 last year. McDonald a slight boost. He was 10 last year. Now number 7, and Pettis obviously not the champion, was last year, so he drops 4 to number 8. But that's kind of that little group of guys, just guys who just lost the title. So they're still good, but not quite towards the top where they were.
It's really in perfect order too of like how good they performed in that title fight. Because I mean, Pettis, not to say he got destroyed, but yeah, he really wasn't. I never for a second was like, yeah, Pettis has got this fight. So it's tough for him. He's still young though. We know how exciting Pettis is. You're going to see him back in there real quick. And then for Rory and Gustafsson, man, I mean, talk about 2 of. All right, let's just start with Gustafsson then, because the last, say the 10 rounds he had with Cormier and Jones are 10 of the best rounds of fights you can ever watch. And I feel so bad because there's guys that get a lot of title shots like Kenny Florian and blah, blah, but they kind of choke and they lose the shots. Gustafsson has not only got them, but he takes every champ to the limit, and he's just one round away or one little, and he's just that close. And like, I don't think there's anyone that's like, oh, he got destroyed. Rumble kind of caught him, obviously, but people are going to argue he beat Cormier. People are going to argue he beat Jones, and it was just amazing. And then Rory, too. I mean, there's not a guy with more heart. That fight he put on with Lawler was absolutely insane. I think he was ahead on the judges' scorecards. Unfortunately, got finished, so that takes a lot away from it. But that Gustafsson and Rory have put on some of the best fights I've ever seen. And I'll say that as just a fan, like those title fights are the best fights ever.
And again, I believe Gustafsson just turned 28. McDonald's 26. So these are guys that still have a lot of time to be a UFC champion. And Pettis, obviously, I believe he's 26 or 27. So these are guys, at least in Pettis' case, I think as tough it is to get back and become a repeat champion, I think Anthony Pettis can do it. He's young enough. I think he's driven enough to do that. And I think you also, the fact that his title reign got interrupted by injuries. I think you heard a lot of talk about him being soft and not a true champion. So I think he's really motivated to come back in there. And you add now his brothers in the UFC, I think that adds kind of another dynamic to that. He's like training with another, not to say there are not UFC guys in his camp, but kind of training alongside with your brother who's also trying to be a world champion and that drive as well. I think that kind of can help him too.
A nod to Sergio too. You'll probably see him on this list soon.
Yeah, he was very close, but obviously he's not quite where Horiguchi and Suheido is. So 100%. That's why we just had to leave him off. But I think he's only 22, so he will be on this list very soon, if not next year, with some of these guys that come off.
You don't see him at least on the back top 5, maybe higher if he keeps getting big wins. But then I also want to say too, like kind of like you said, Pettis and Rory, I feel like they do still have a shot. It's going to be tough for Roy because he left a lot out there. Gustafsson, I feel like it's kind of it for him. But in that division, this is kind of a tangent too, kind of like heavyweight. I feel like Cormier, Gustafsson, and Jones are just a different level of amazing. I feel like if any of them wasn't in the picture, like they would all be great as champions. Like imagine if John Jones didn't exist, how great Cormier would be looked at, or Gustafsson would if they. But I feel like below that, it takes a big drop. Like you watch that Bader Rashad fight, just not looking like it's going to be close to these guys.
The top 5, the coveted top 5 here. At number 5, he's the only one in the top 5 that's not an actual UFC champion. I say that because he's technically the interim champion, and that is the notorious one, Conor McGregor. He has the second biggest jump on this year's list at 8 spots. He was number 13 last year, now number 5. TJ Dillashaw just moving up 1 spot. He was already the champion last year. He's at number 4, and we have the same exact top 3 as last year because you can't really move these guys for more than a while. Jose Aldo at 3, Mighty Mouse at 2, and for the 4th year in a row, he's been our number 1 every single year, and why wouldn't he be? And that's John Jones. And despite all the problems and whatnot, he's still number 1 in everyone's mind. He's young enough that I even think with this layoff, when he comes back, he's not going to have it as hit hard as some other guys. And I think he'll want to have something to prove because the way it went down in his personal life, it had nothing to do with fighting, just simply off the field, off the cage issues for him. So he's probably going to fight back in 2016. That's why he's not off the list. So obviously, like I said, Conor McGregor gets the big jump here and could next year, if he ends up winning, he could potentially shoot up to number 2 next year.
Wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, so he could shoot up real quick. But these just are all guys that are the best in their division. And Conor's 1A, 1B with all the technically the way of the championship. But these guys have just been around the longest and been dominating. And it's crazy that we have 3 guys at the top who have been champion for so long and so dominant at such a young age.
I just want to it blows me away to think that John Jones, how long has he had the belt? 5-6 years now? It's been a long time. Maybe a little shorter than that. It's been a while. Aldo, I mean, before the UFC even had a featherweight, he was dominant in the other organizations that were the prime for that weight class. I mean, he's been dominant at the top of the world for that long, and he's still got 3 years left on this list. What is he, 28? So, yeah. 27?
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's amazing to me. It shows how good they are and how freak nature they are. I mean, to be that good and that young and dominant for so long is just there's just greatness. I mean, for John Jones, you see it to be in that 4 years in a row. And then when I talk about how good guys like Cormier or Gustafsson are, and to think he comes out here and beats these guys, I'm gonna be honest, I'm by no means, I'm not a John Jones fan.
I don't think either of us really are, to be honest.
But you can't sit here and look at what he's done and just not respect it. It's absolutely amazing. How I don't even think he picked the sport up till he was like, what, 20? And then by the time he was 24, he's world champion?
Yeah, I think I remember seeing his first ever UFC fight, UFC 87, and I thought someone said he had been training for less than a year in MMA. And I think at that time he was the youngest fighter in the UFC at like 19 years old. And I remember seeing that fight and like, wow, this, you saw flashes. He was still pretty raw in that first fight. And be like, wow, this could be something. And it's crazy to think that from that moment to seeing what he's become and everything he's done, there are very few fighters that he's since I started watching the sport, he's kind of one of the few guys that you've seen actually deliver on the hype, that go, this kid's a prospect, can be a UFC champion. Everyone was talking about since day one, and then come up. The only other guy I can really remember guys talking about and delivering on the championship, obviously Conor could be that next guy.
I was going to say,
but Cain Velasquez was a guy a lot of people were talking about, that this dude was, no one wanted to fight him. He was scary. He just came into the UFC and just ran through everybody to get to the title. Obviously, a little setback now, but I mean, he's a guy that's probably going to be in the UFC Hall of Fame when it's all said and done.
No doubt. If you ever look at top 3 heavyweights of all time, you can't not put him in there. And yeah, for that, like, there aren't many that you're like, this kid's going to do it. This kid's the future. And then it pans out that way. Jones was one. He's ahead of the curve. And Conor, I think he's on the path. If he beats Aldo, he for sure is. But I mean, there's no doubt in my mind about Conor anymore. When you go out there and you knock out Chad Mendes, I don't care what you want to say around it. Like, 100%, I think he might be another guy like John Jones in the future.
All right, well, that is this year's list and the episode for today, the 30 under 30 list. Again, if you want to see a complete breakdown of this year's list and our previous year's list, again, go to the comments section below, click it, and it'll take you right to the note on our Facebook page, facebook.com/Beyond the Cage podcast. And of course, please like and share the video and tell everybody about it as well. Billy Brant, he's on Twitter at WBrant21. Any other final thoughts here on the list?
I think the petition's about to end, unfortunately, and I don't think it's going to hit it. Came real close, but free Nick Diaz.
We got a couple of interviews in the work. We're going to try to get, we couldn't get him this week, but we're going to hopefully get him next week. AJ Hiller should be coming on the show, and we're also working, I don't want to give it away because it hasn't been booked yet, but we're going to get an interesting 2-sport athlete here on Beyond the Cage.
Who could that be?
We are working on that. So
we're literally going beyond the cage.
Yeah, we are. We are going beyond the cage, though he sometimes fights in the cage.
Sometimes
he doesn't. But we're working on that interview as well. So for Billy Brant, I'm your host, Jim Gramm. You can follow me on Twitter at Jim Gramm. And once again, thank you so much for listening to another edition of the Beyond the Cage podcast.